Hello, all. This week we're going to be discussing Backrooms. Is it the groundbreaking debut of a visual effects prodigy hitting the heights of his powers? Or is it just kind of student film energy with a massive budget and delusions of grandeur? Stick around to find out. Hello and welcome to Middle Aged Geeks. I am flying solo this week. Daz is out of the country, so please be gentle with me. It's my first time. Today we are going to be digging into the corridors, nightmares, and the sheer audacity of bringing a YouTube mini horror series of urban legend to the big screen. So let's find out if this thing is actually scary or if I'm just desensitized to horror after decades and decades of that type of movie. So what are we dealing with here? Well, I think we've kind of got a classic. When people think of a classic portal to another world trope, you might think of Alice in Wonderland or Jennifer Connelly and Labyrinth with David Bowie, picturing, expecting magical adventure and maybe even some singing goblins. But that all gets thrown out the window here because in this film, our characters walk through a door and they find themselves not in a wonderful fantasy land of music and creatures and shit, but in an endless, infinite loop of yellow wallpaper, flickering lights, and the kind of hallways that make you want to call an architect and or a therapist. So essentially, this place, this Yellow Rooms, is like a cosmic junk drawer, and it's kind of if I think I was as I was watching it, I was thinking if I ended up there, I don't think I'd need a monster or some force to kill me because I would get lost in IKEA if there wasn't for arrows on the floor. So I'm pretty sure I would just curl up in a ball in the very first room I walked into. Um, but let's see how our main characters get on. Few more details about the movie before we get into our cast. So this one is directed and did the music and score done by Kane Parsons, who obviously made the YouTube short. The script is written by Will Sudick, and the cinematographer is Jeremy Cox. And so, yeah, the main cast we've got is Chiwetel Ejiofor and Renate Reinsve, and they're really the two mains. We also have a small kind of supporting cast with Mark Duplass, Avon Jogia, Lakita Maxwell, Finn Bennett, Philip Granger, and Robert Bobrovsky. I'm never going to get that. So yeah, like I think when you look at that list of that cast, you've got it like an A-list cast, especially with Chiwetel and Renate working with a cinematographer like Jeremy Cox, and it's wild to remember that the person steering this whole ship is Kane Parsons. Like he's not just the director, as I said, he's the one that composed the score. He's the one that built this whole digital world that this movie lives in, and so it's a total auteur project, and it's a rare thing to see in film that has this kind of scale and this kind of production, which is fantastic. And I think this is where this movie kind of separates itself a little bit from standard horror. I think it focuses on like two deeply flawed people who are trying to maintain their sanity in a world that fundamentally defies all logic. For his part, Chiwetel Ejiofor, who plays Clark, he's essentially the architect of his own failure. Like he kind of he's the runner of Captain Cook's Ottoman Empire furniture store, and he's a man that basically builds physical spaces for people to live in via furniture, although he wants to be an architect. But his life is completely hollow and by his own hand, and he tries to project this image of being successful and important, while really drowning in his own inadequacy. And I think that I love the way Chiwetel Ejiofor plays him with this like constant simmering desperation, not just before being, the stuff that's going on in his life with his wife and his house and his business, but also just simmering with his own inadequacies. Like when he finally gets to these back rooms, he's not like this hero searching for treasure. He's a man that's finally found the world that is, I guess you'd say, as broken and as fake as he feels on the inside. And Renate Reinsve, who plays Mary, I don't know a massive amount about her. She isn't just a therapist; she's someone who she kind of uses her own past trauma, her mother's mental anguish issues, things from her own childhood to connect with Clark, to connect with Chiwetel. She thinks that she can heal him, or at least help him navigate his own grief. And I think that, like, as someone who's trained as a therapist, one thing that really jumped out at me is how Mary was perfectly captures that wounded healer thing. Like, we people have this kind of cultural myth about going to the therapist. The therapist going to fix everything. Therapists are unshakable. They're your all-knowing guru. But in reality, most people who get into that line are doing so because they've been there, they've struggled, they've felt loss, and they want to help others. And I think that I think that really they really hammer that point home. We see Mary's backstory with her mother, and it kind of there's a sadness there because it it makes her descent, I suppose, into Backrooms so much more tragic. She spends her life trying to fix other people's broken realities, and then she falls into this place, this otherworldly place where reality itself is broken. And like I said, it's kind of just it's both mainly those two in a small kind of sideways cast. But one other that's worth mentioning is Mark Duplass, who plays a guy called Phil, who's kind of the corporate stooge for the async company. Now, this is kind of thing. If you've watched um the backroom shorts on YouTube, you'll probably know a lot more going into this movie about async. It plays a little bit of a backseat here, but what I like is that he provides this kind of chilling counterpoint to Clark and Mary, like, because they're experiencing Backrooms as this personal nightmare of theirs, where as Phil, he experiences it as this scientific and corporate asset. It's something to be learned about, not just explored, but exploited. And I like that. That's terrifying as well. Like, as the audience, you're saying, Jesus, how can you have that point of view? When you're seeing the visceral, personal horror of it being lost on, um, that these people are getting is kind of lost on him because he's just detached. It's all about corporate exploitation, and yeah, I kind of really enjoyed that. I thought that was a nice little balance, and um, I think where this is different from the shorts is that Clark and Mary, Chiwetel and Renata, they carry this movie because they're making the world feel much more grounded. Like, when they're talking in that weird flickering fluorescent light that we hear the whole time, you believe they're therapists or patients, and not just actors in a green screen room, which can happen if this whole thing was done. And that's the magic here. They make their kind of messy human baggage right up until the moment that the architecture itself starts trying to, steal them, digest them. Um, I think that the hat off here with making this happen has to go to the director. Like, we have to talk about Kane Parsons. Like, a few years ago, we're talking about a kid that was in his bedroom, a 17-year-old, I think, when he started, and using Blender to rent these haunting, um, glitchy kind of yellow wallpapered nightmare rooms, and then expertly having camera movement to make it look like it's an actual person's POV with a VHS going through. And now, like, we've got A24, who, as I've mentioned millions of times, are a personal favorite of mine. Like, their studio behind some of the most prestigious films that we've seen over the last decade, which I think is fair to say. And, like, that they've kind of handed them the keys to the castle here. It's kind of an industry anomaly because it's not often you see someone jump from, like, straight from the viral internet sensation into multi-million dollar set building, um that still manages to keep the soul of their original project. Like, yes, sure, there's people who started on YouTube, like we mentioned Curry Barker last week, and we mentioned Markiplier has made Iron Lung. That's fantastic, and they're doing great in their own right. But to come in and get, like, A-list stars in a movie in a studio like A24 and be given this kind of money, that is unprecedented, and I think what's wild about the movie itself is that it is a love letter to that do it yourself, because that's what he was doing. All of this was, majority was him in Blender, and then of course a lot of his friends and stuff acting in the parts in the shorts. But I think it's a love letter to that because he went from the kid making the animations in the room to making these, like, 30,000 square foot sets is what they made for this, in a major motion picture. I think this was 10 million was the budget. So this is the same just the same guy, but he's playing with the same toys, but on a much bigger budget. And to have that trust in him, I think is fantastic. And for me, it pays off. Um, and I think that is the real story here. And I'm happy to see Mark Duplass come out kind of in defense of him, because a lot of people online, they're finding it hard to believe that someone of that age, of his only experience being the experience that he's made himself, um, that he's managed to make this movie himself. That he didn't really direct it X, Y, and Z, because James Wan's a producer and Osgood Perkins is a producer. But according to Mark Duplass, he was saying that no, he came in, he was fully prepared. He worked very closely with his DP. He knew exactly how to work with his actors and did so very smartly. And to the naysayers, Mark Duplass was saying, "Were you there? Were you on set? Because I was." And he was delighted with the job that Kane Parsons did, and is looking forward to seeing more. As am I. I think that what's people might get from knowing that he has that background in CGI is that this movie is going to be all CGI. And yes, there are visual effects there, but I think it's the physicality is actually what sells it more here. What you're seeing here, and when you're walking through those endless claustrophobic corridors, is that we're not just seeing pixels. We are seeing that 30,000 square feet of actual physical sets, the lighting, the dust, the kind of hum of the electricity and the fluorescent lights. And that was the result of a director who knows that even in a digital world, you still need something solid to ground the audience when you're making a motion picture, rather than a small short that a lot of people were watching on their phones. And one thing that surprised me there really was this the camera work, because if you've if you've watched the shorts, it's all VHS. But if you haven't going into this, you might be wondering, oh God, is this all going to be is this all going to be found footage? And I think the found footage can be fantastic if it's done properly. But I think what they've got here, the mix of the tension of the found footage and that kind of hearing the breathing behind the camera, because we're seeing what they see. I think they've really kept that aesthetic from the original YouTube studio shorts, which gives you that shaky, claustrophobic, run for your life energy. But it's got this at the same time. Then you've got your high budget, polished cinematic lens scenes, which cover most of the movie. And I think that it's a delicate balance. Like, it feels like you're watching a horror almost through a high end microscope. And it does. It manages then to keep that like raw, shaky cam kind of a grit where it matters and where when it wants to ramp up that horror and stuff. But it doesn't give you, say, the motion sickness of trying to follow like a Blair Witch thing where it's just someone moving around the whole time and you're constantly watching it. It can get a bit much, even if it found horror is done well. That can get a bit much. This is almost a very prestige version of that kind of glitching. I really thought he caught that balance well. And where it hinges and where we get into this Backrooms and stuff really kind of comes from the no clipping mechanic. Like, if you're into video games, you'll know we have this kind of reality breaking glitch. So if you've played a video game, especially an older one, sometimes there's certain angles you can run at a wall. And sometimes it can end up being a shortcut, but you run at the wall, what's not supposed to be there. And instead of collision, you go through it and you end up into this just negative, never space, black void hole, which sometimes gets you to a bonus level or finish a Mario Kart race shorter than you should. Or sometimes you have to just reboot your whole system. And I think that the movie kind of treats it like that's what it is, that it's one big cosmic accident. Like 1 second you're here, real world, and the next you've slipped through the cracks of existence into this junk drawer reality. And yeah, okay. I think no clipping is just a good piece of jargon, but it's a really accurate way of showing that terrifying oops moment that ruins their lives, is just crossing through this barrier that shouldn't be there. Now, like I said, if you're a fan of the shorts, you're going to have to be prepared for a bit of a shift. Like, if you're expecting a dive and finally learning more about this Async Corporation and what their kind of plans and motivations are, you might be slightly kind of disappointed. Like, this is very much a much vaguer about the why itself. It's much more vague. This strips away the Async Corporation to a bare minimum. So there's not, no technical manuals or no pictures of the machines that they use or anything like that. So instead of being like tech horror, it leans harder into being the basic human story. So less about the science of the portal and more about the trauma of the people that actually get stuck inside it. And honestly, I think it was the right call. It keeps people focused on the nightmare itself rather than the paperwork, I guess, around it. Um, and to that, like you have to have the sound. I think that's what makes this really really work, because we're talking about big, huge, empty, yellow fucking hallways, and so we need to talk about the sound design and how it works. Like in background, it's not just background noise, and we say it on the podcast a lot, but it is essentially a character. Like it might even be the scariest part of it, because Kane Parsons uses this relentless hum that we get of the of electricity and of the fluorescent lights, and sometimes you forget it's there, and sometimes it kind of comes back, and it's almost that it's just burrowed into your brain because it's constantly there, and it creates this constant low level anxiety of it just being zzz, and it just doesn't go away, and it's kind of unnerving, and like I by the time the, when it does cut away, what you do get is silence, because there isn't a massive amount of music in this movie, um, and the silence is almost as bad. Like it's very smart with its minimalism. Like it's not just constant noise. It's the way the music can drop out entirely, and then we can hear footsteps or some sort of banging off in the distance, but we have no idea where it is. We know it's closing in, and even though the camera's facing in the direction, it's all yellow walls with walls and cut off points in different directions, and you can hear the noise, but never quite see it. And it really is. It's kind of that old adage of it's the what you don't see is worse than what you do see kind of horror technique. But I think they really really nail it well here. And it makes you feel like you're trapped in the space with them, which I guess is ideally exactly what you want from a movie like this. Um, I think that watching this in a theater for me was almost, there was only like what, maybe I think two to three other people in the screen with me, and I still felt that claustrophobic feel despite being in there essentially on my own. So it's yeah, it really is. It really is a masterful use of sound, and I'm glad that he took the helm himself when it came to that, because it really shines through. Uh, I suppose then I don't want to keep prattling on, because I am just one dude talking to a camera. So I'm gonna give it a star rating. I think that first I just want to say that again, it's the hammer home. I do think that you should see this in a movie, and I'm not just saying that as a movie snob. I think you should see it in the cinema. It really does kind of live and die by its design. Like if that all that buzzing and all the rhythmic sound and footsteps I'm talking about, you really need a high end stereo system to really feel that. And yes, maybe you've got some setup at home and you'll get something of it, but I think on a standard TV setup or on a laptop, you're losing half of the movie, because it's really the heartbeat of it. Um, I do want to finish on a downside, because as much as I did enjoy it, I think this is a fair enough downside, is that it, although I've said that they've been tight-lipped on the lore, I think they were maybe too tight-lipped. Um, it's just because if you haven't seen the YouTube short, you might walk out of this movie with way more questions than really you should. Because we do get to meet this faceless corporation, but this async, we were kind of pulling the strings in the background and stuff, but we get such small amounts from them. Um, but the stuff that we do get doesn't really give us that much info. Like you're left with questions like, why these are a company that used to make MRI machines. Why are they now dabbling in like cosmic nightmares in the basement? It's a little tiny bit more. That would have been nice. A little bit, maybe a scene here and there, a flashback or something to give us a little bit more to chew on. But it's a small gripe. I think overall, the way this movie's come out, it's just been great. It's just, I think that it's obviously nice to have general mystery, and I think just a tiny bit would have gone a long way. But that said, even if you're a little confused by the why of everything is happening, the how, the acting and the sets and the sound and everything else just makes it a trip worth taking. So I'm very happy with it, and I'm going to give it, I'm going to give it a solid 4 out of 5. I think it's definitely worth seeing. It's such an inventive horror. We are having a killer week for or a killer year for horror movies. We're in a killer period for horror movies right now, which is just wonderful. And yeah, please may it continue. Great job, Kane Parsons. I cannot wait to see what he does next and where he goes from here. Because I'll be watching on with great interest. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in this week and for listening to little old me. Next week I'll have my partner in crime back with me, and hopefully we'll be doing Masters of the Universe, some nice cheesy He-Man awesomeness. So look, keep liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, all that good stuff. Look after each other, and we will see you on the next one. Take it easy.